Welcome back to Emotional Edge, where every story reminds us that even in life's darkest storms, light still finds a way through. Today's tale begins on a storm-battered cliff in rural Texas, where a lonely veteran stands face to face with fate itself. A terrified dog clinging to the edge, and a past he's tried so hard to forget. As thunder roars and the river rages below, one man will make a choice that changes two lives forever. Stay with us until the end, because what he discovers about this dog will break your heart, lift your spirit, and remind you that healing sometimes comes on four paws. Thank you for watching this story on Emotional Edge, where every tale reminds us that kindness, courage, and loyalty still matter. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us keep sharing heartfelt stories that bring warmth, hope, and humanity back into our world. From all of us here, and from every loyal dog and quiet hero we honor, thank you for being part of our family. Thank you for being here with us. And now, let's continue our story. The rain had come without warning, a wall of water and wind tearing across the Texas hill country, flattening fences and drowning the lowlands. Ethan Cole moved with the steady rhythm of a man who had weathered worse storms, though never one like this. His ranch sat on the edge of a limestone canyon carved by the Pedernales River, a calm ribbon of blue that had now turned into a brown, snarling beast. When the lightning finally faded and the thunder rolled away into the distance, he stepped outside, boots sinking into red mud, the sky pale and cold like a bruise. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he thought it might be the wind. Then again, a bark. Weak, broken, desperate. Ethan froze. The sound came from the canyon. He ran to the ridge, the mud clutching his boots like hands trying to hold him back. 40 feet below, on a narrow ledge carved by erosion and fate, stood a dog, a German shepherd, grey and cream, soaked and trembling. The floodwaters churned below, licking the base of the cliff like a predator waiting for the fall. Ethan's pulse hammered. There was no path down, no way around. Just him, the dog, and the storm that had stripped the world bare. He hadn't climbed since Afghanistan. Not since the day a single misstep cost a man his life. The rope had burned his palms that day. The memory still seared into him like a scar. But as he looked at the dog, at the way its body swayed with exhaustion, at the faint whine carried on the wind, something shifted inside him. He wasn't looking at an animal anymore. He was looking at the ghost of everything he'd lost. Without thinking, he turned and ran back to the house. In the closet, behind a box of medals he never displayed, was a dusty duffel bag filled with climbing gear he swore he'd never touch again. The metal carabiners clinked like whispers of the past. "One more time," he muttered. He anchored the rope around an ancient oak whose roots clutched the cliff like a fist, tested the tension, and leaned back. His heart pounded in his throat as the ground fell away beneath him. The air smelled of wet stone and fear. The dog barked again, its voice raw but steady. Ethan descended carefully, boots scraping against limestone, hands burning with effort. 10 feet above the ledge, the dog growled, lips pulling back in instinctive fear. But he kept his tone calm, his voice steady as a heartbeat. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." The storm had left the world silent except for the soft hiss of water and rope. Finally, his boots found the ledge. The dog stood pressed against the rock, trembling, eyes wide with a mix of defiance and surrender. Ethan crouched slowly, avoiding eye contact. He slipped a loop of webbing around the animal's chest, his fingers brushing wet fur, feeling the hammer of its heart. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, trust. The dog exhaled, a soft shudder that broke the tension. Ethan clipped the harness to his belt. "Hang on," he whispered. Together they rose inch by inch, man and dog suspended between earth and sky. When they reached the top, he collapsed in the mud, the dog beside him, both gasping for air. The storm was gone, but its echo lingered. And somewhere in the space between those two breaths, Ethan realized he hadn't just saved the dog. He'd pulled himself back from the edge too. The storm left behind a world washed clean, yet heavy with silence. A silence that clung to the air like smoke. Ethan carried the dog through the front door, his boots dripping water onto the wooden floor, his breath still ragged from the climb. He set the animal down gently on an old wool blanket near the hearth. The dog collapsed immediately, sides heaving, its fur streaked with mud and blood from shallow cuts. Ethan crouched beside him, his hands trembling not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, an echo of adrenaline and fear that refused to fade. He fetched a towel and his old medic kit, the same one he had used in the desert years ago, and began cleaning the wounds with a quiet precision that came from memory. The dog didn't resist. It watched him with weary amber eyes, alert but calm, as if recognizing the hands of another survivor. "You're one tough soldier," Ethan murmured, the words slipping out before he realized it. When he finished, he sat back against the wall, staring into the flickering light of the oil lamp. The house smelled of wet fur, antiseptic, and rain. He hadn't had company in years. The last visitor to sit here had been a VA counselor who stopped coming after Ethan stopped answering the door. He had built his life around solitude, feeding the horses, mending fences, sleeping when the nightmares allowed it. Now, that rhythm was broken by the sound of slow, steady breathing coming from the blanket. The dog's presence was both comforting and unbearable. Every rise and fall of its chest reminded Ethan of a different rhythm. The shallow, fading breaths of Corporal Mason Hale, the brother he couldn't save on a sun-bleached ridge halfway across the world. He could still see the sand whipping through the air, the glint of the sniper's scope, the thunder of gunfire, and the loyal shepherd, Rex, standing guard over his fallen handler until the very end. That memory had built a wall inside him, one that no human hand had been able to break. But now, lying a few feet away, another shepherd slept, grey and cream, where Rex had been sable and black, older, calmer, but the resemblance was undeniable. Ethan reached out slowly, resting his hand on the dog's back. The fur was warm under his calloused palm, the heartbeat steady. He hadn't touched another living soul in years, and the contact sent something electric through him, something dangerously close to hope. "Guess I'll call you Valor," he whispered. The dog stirred but didn't move away. The name felt right. It carried the weight of courage, of sacrifice, of everything Ethan had buried. He left a bowl of water and half a can of soup beside the blanket, then moved to the porch. Outside, the world was quiet again. The rain had stopped, and the sky stretched wide and pale over the wounded land. The fence was down, the river swollen beyond its banks, but for the first time, Ethan didn't care. Behind him, in the house, a presence filled the emptiness he had lived with for too long. As the night deepened, he sat rocking slowly, the wooden chair creaking in time with his thoughts. Every few minutes, he glanced through the open door, just to be sure the dog was still there, breathing, real. When dawn came, he found Valor standing by the window, tail low but wagging faintly, watching him. Ethan smiled, a small, unfamiliar twitch of muscle, and for the first time in 10 years, he brewed 2 cups of coffee. One for himself, one for the silence that wasn't empty anymore. By the second morning, the story had already reached the diner in Willow Bend, a town so small that its rumors traveled faster than the wind that shaped the mesquite trees. "That old Marine down by the ridge pulled a shepherd out of the canyon," someone said between sips of coffee, and before noon, half the town had an opinion about it. To most, it was a simple tale of courage, a man rescuing a helpless animal. But to one listener, it was something else entirely. Mr. Henry Carter, the grey-haired founder of the Willow Bend Animal Rescue, sat quietly in his booth, staring into the swirl of his untouched coffee. He had seen too much of dogs like that, large, powerful breeds with unknown histories. Once, long ago, one had turned on his own family. The memory was a scar that would never fade. The scream of his 6-year-old son, the blood, the hospital lights, the silence afterward. Now, hearing about Ethan Cole and his German Shepherd, the old fear stirred awake like an old injury aching before the rain. That afternoon, Carter drove out of town in his battered green pickup. The rescue's logo faded on the door. Dust followed him down the narrow road that wound through the hills until he reached Ethan's ranch. The world out there felt too wide, too quiet, a place for ghosts more than for men. Ethan was outside fixing a broken fence post, the sun reflecting off his sweat-streaked forearms. Beside him, Valor lay in the grass, his head on his paws, eyes following every move. When Carter pulled up, the dog rose instantly, body tensed, not aggressive, but alert, protective. Ethan noticed and called softly, "Easy, Valor." The dog relaxed, though his gaze never left the stranger. Carter stepped out slowly, hat in hand, his expression polite but firm. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice carrying the weary authority of someone who had spent a lifetime in control. "Name's Henry Carter. I run the animal rescue in town. Heard what you did out by the river. Fine work, brave work." Ethan nodded, cautious. Compliments from strangers were rare, and trust didn't come easy. "Just did what needed doing," he said simply. Carter glanced at the dog. "That's him, I take it?" Ethan nodded again. "You planning to keep him?" The question wasn't friendly curiosity. It was a warning wrapped in politeness. "He's not just a stray," Ethan replied, his tone even but unyielding. "He's trained, disciplined. Someone's dog once." Carter's eyes narrowed slightly. "Maybe," he said, "but you can't know where he came from. I've seen cases like this. Big dog, no papers, no record. You think you're helping, but sometimes they remember the wrong kind of training." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He's not dangerous." "You sure?" Carter asked softly. "Because every man who ever told me that thought he was too. Until it was too late." The silence between them was heavy, stretching like the land itself. Behind them, the wind brushed through the dry grass, carrying the faint rattle of distant thunder, leftovers from the storm. Valor stood quietly beside his new master, his body a line of calm strength, his amber eyes flicking between the two men. For a moment, Carter's face softened, a flicker of understanding passing through the wall of fear. "Look," he said finally, "I'm not your enemy, Mr. Cole, but that dog needs to be evaluated, for his safety and everyone else's. Let me take him in for a few days. We'll check his behavior, look for a microchip, make sure he's clear." Ethan shook his head, firm but calm. "He's been through enough. He stays with me." Carter exhaled slowly, the lines around his mouth deepening. "You're making a mistake," he said, climbing back into his truck. "Some things can't be undone once they happen." As the old pickup disappeared down the dirt road, Ethan looked at Valor, who was now sitting at his side, eyes steady, waiting for a command. "You heard him," Ethan muttered. "He thinks you're trouble." The dog's tail gave a single, silent wag. Ethan smiled faintly. "Guess that makes two of us." Behind them, the sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the ground. The world felt quieter, but not at peace. Something unseen had shifted. An old fear had found its way back into the light. The night came slow and heavy over the Texas hills, the kind of night that carried ghosts. Ethan sat on the porch, boots resting on the railing, Valor asleep at his feet. The stars blinked faintly through a veil of drifting clouds, and the cicadas sang their endless dirge. It should have been peaceful, but peace was something Ethan had long forgotten. The encounter with Mr. Carter kept circling in his mind like a vulture. His words, his fear, his conviction that Valor was dangerous. Ethan told himself he didn't care what the man thought, yet deep down, a small poisonous doubt whispered, what if Carter was right? What if the past had returned wearing a new face and four legs? He looked at Valor, lying there with the trustful calm of something pure, and immediately hated himself for the thought. "You saved my life," he murmured softly. "That's more than most men ever did." Inside the house, the lamplight flickered. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when they opened again, the porch was gone. The air had changed, dry, thin, burning. He was back in the Korangal Valley. The mountains were jagged against the white glare of the Afghan sun, the dust biting at his throat. Mason was beside him, grinning under his helmet. "You good, Sarge?" Mason had said. Ethan remembered that grin, the way it lit up the filth and fear of the day. Then came the crack. Just one shot, clean and final. Mason dropped. The world exploded. The sand erupted around him, bullets slicing the air. And there, in the chaos, Rex, the German shepherd with the black saddle and the golden eyes, stood over Mason's body, barking, snarling, holding his ground. Ethan remembered the way the dog's body jerked when the second round hit, the scream that never left his throat, the guilt that never left his soul. He woke with a shout, drenched in sweat, the sound of automatic fire still echoing in his ears. His breath came in ragged gasps, his hands trembling. For a few seconds, he didn't know where he was. Then a soft whine broke through the storm in his head. Vala stood beside the bed, eyes glowing in the moonlight, ears low, posture still. Ethan's vision blurred, his body frozen between fight and collapse. The dog stepped closer and pressed his head against Ethan's arm, firm, grounding, real. Ethan's breath caught, the texture of the fur, the warmth of the weight against him. It was exactly what Rex used to do after a firefight. How do you know that?" he whispered. The dog didn't move. It just leaned harder, a silent anchor against the tide of memory. Ethan's shoulders shook, the dam inside him cracking open after 10 years of silence. The tears came hot and bitter, falling freely into Vala's coat. "I left him?" Ethan choked out. "I left them both." Vala didn't flinch. He stayed, breathing slow, steady, patient, like he had done this before, like he understood the language of broken soldiers. For the first time in a decade, Ethan let the grief run its course. When it was over, the house was still again. But the silence was different, no longer suffocating, but alive, like the air after a storm. Vala lay beside the bed now, his head resting across Ethan's boots, his amber eyes half closed. Outside, dawn crept over the horizon, washing the land in a pale gold light. Ethan sat there, watching the sky turn from grey to pink, the weight in his chest lighter than it had been in years. "You're not a ghost," he said softly. "You're my second chance." Vala's tail brushed against the floor, a faint thump in answer. And as the sun broke through the window, touching both man and dog with its warmth, Ethan realized that for the first time since the war, he had finally slept and woken to something worth living for. By the time the sun reached its midday peak, the ranch was breathing again. The fields glistened under a film of dew, and the fences were half rebuilt. Ethan worked shirtless under the heat, the sun carving hard lines of sweat and dust into his skin. Every few minutes, he'd glance toward the house where Vala lay in the shade of the porch, eyes half closed but alert, always watching. There was a rhythm now between them, simple, wordless, almost sacred. Ethan had stopped talking to himself while working. He didn't need to anymore. Vala listened. Yet the uneasy peace of the ranch wouldn't last. By afternoon, a shadow returned, this time in the form of a letter delivered by the sheriff's office. It was formal, cold, and brief. Complaint filed by Mr. Henry Carter. Potentially dangerous animal in residence. Mandatory verification required. Ethan crushed the paper in his fist, anger surging through the calm like a storm front. He knew Carter's fear wasn't born of malice, but pain didn't give him the right to judge. "They're not taking you," Ethan muttered, looking at Vala. The dog tilted his head slightly, as if he understood. The next day, while fixing the north fence, Ethan left the back door open so Vala could wander. The air was dry, humming with the low thrum of cicadas. He was hammering a post into the ground when he heard it. The bark, sharp, rhythmic. 3 short bursts, followed by a pause, then repeated. Ethan froze, every instinct kicking in. That wasn't a random bark. That was an alert pattern, precise and trained. He dropped the hammer and sprinted toward the house, boots pounding the dry ground. As he came around the corner, he saw it. Valor standing rigid in the doorway, blocking the entrance with his body, eyes locked on something in the grass. 10 feet away, coiled in perfect patience, was a rattlesnake as thick as Ethan's wrist, its tail buzzing like a live wire. The dog didn't move. He didn't attack. He held the line, focused, unshakable. Ethan's mind went blank and clear, the way it used to on patrols. He spotted a long-handled hoe by the porch and grabbed it. "Hold," he ordered quietly. Valor stayed perfectly still, the muscles in his shoulders trembling with restraint. One swing, clean and final, and the threat was gone. The air fell silent. Ethan stood breathing hard, the tool shaking in his hands. Valor turned to him, whining softly, tail low. Ethan knelt, checking him from nose to paw, his fingers searching for punctures, his heart hammering. No bites, no wounds, nothing but steadiness and discipline. The kind of discipline that only came from training, a soldier's training. Ethan sat back in the dirt, pulling the dog close. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew exactly what to do." Valor pressed against him, eyes soft, chest rising slow and even. The realization hit Ethan like a rush of light through dark water. This dog wasn't a stray. He was a veteran, just like him. That night, as the sun fell over the hills, the sheriff's cruiser rolled up the long dirt road. Sheriff Brad, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped out with his hat in hand. Behind him, Carter's green truck rattled to a stop. Ethan felt the old fire flare inside him, but he kept his tone steady. "You here to take him?" he asked. Brad sighed. "Just here to talk, son." Carter's eyes darted toward Valor, who stood calmly beside Ethan, silent and watchful. "You saw what he did today?" Ethan asked sharply. "He didn't attack. He protected." Carter's voice wavered. "So did the one that hurt my boy." The words hung between them, thick and heavy as the heat. Brad raised a hand, calm but firm. "We'll do this right. No one's taking him yet. But the law needs proof. If that dog's trained, if he's military, show me something I can write down." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of the ultimatum settling in. 72 hours, Brad said, tipping his hat. "That's what I can give you." As the vehicles rolled away, the ranch fell quiet again. Ethan looked at Valor, who was now sitting at his side, gaze steady, body relaxed. 3 days, he murmured. "That's all we've got to prove who you are." Valor gave one low, confident bark, the sound of a soldier ready for orders. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat at the table under the dull glow of a single lamp, the sheriff's words echoing in his mind. 72 hours. Outside, the crickets sang their low hymn to the night, and Valor slept beside the door, head resting on his paws, breathing steady. Ethan stared at the dog's profile, the faint scars around the muzzle, the cropped fur behind the left ear, the calmness in every muscle, even while asleep. Everything about him screamed history, discipline, and loss. "We're going to prove it, boy," Ethan whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. At sunrise, he loaded Valor into the truck and drove the winding road into town, past the gas station, past the diner where gossip lived. The Willow Bend Veterinary Clinic stood at the edge of the highway, pale blue paint faded by the Texas sun. Dr. Elena Ruiz met them at the door. She was in her 40s, confident, kind-eyed, the kind of woman who didn't flinch at silence. Ethan explained the situation, the complaint, the sheriff, the deadline. She nodded once, understanding the urgency without questions. "Let's scan him," she said simply. Valor stood calmly on the exam table as she ran the microchip reader over his shoulder. For a few seconds, there was only the hum of the machine, then a sharp beep. Ethan's heart leapt. "He's chipped?" he asked, breath catching. "Yes," Dr. Ruiz said, frowning slightly at the screen. "But the registry's corrupted. The name's blank. Address listed as pending update." Ethan's hopes sank. "That means nothing?" "Not nothing," she said, her tone shifting. Sometimes these dogs have dual IDs. Check his ears. She gently lifted Vala's left ear, pausing when her fingers brushed something faint but deliberate. A blue-green tattoo, barely visible beneath the fur. She leaned closer, tracing the faded numbers with a gloved fingertip. "That's a military identification," she murmured. Ethan's chest tightened. "You're sure?" "Absolutely. MWD, Military Working Dog. This one's from Lackland Air Force Base." Her eyes met his. "If I cross-reference this number with the Department of Defense archive, we might find his record." She turned to the computer, typing quickly. The screen flickered, lines of code scrolling, then froze on a single image. A younger, sharper-looking German Shepherd, eyes alive with focus, standing beside a soldier in uniform. The caption below read, "Vala, MWD 742, honorably retired. 2 tours, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan." Ethan stared at the photo until it blurred. His hands trembled. "Vala," he whispered. The dog looked up, ears twitching at the sound of his name. Then something remarkable happened. His tail wagged, slow and certain, as if acknowledging that he'd finally been found. Dr. Ruiz smiled softly. "He remembers." Ethan swallowed hard, the lump in his throat refusing to move. The truth hit like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. This wasn't a stray, not a ghost of his past. This was a soldier, a survivor, a brother. He gathered the printed documents and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Brad met him outside, his calm eyes narrowing as Ethan handed him the papers. "He's registered," Ethan said simply. "Vala, military working dog, retired and honorably discharged." The sheriff skimmed the file, then looked at the man before him, the same haunted veteran he'd seen broken for years, and nodded. "Looks like the both of you finally found your way home." Word spread through Willow Bend faster than wildfire. The story that had started as suspicion turned into something sacred. A man and a dog, both soldiers, both survivors, finding each other after the storm. That afternoon, Mr. Carter came up the long dirt road again, this time with his young son, Luke, sitting beside him. The boy bore a thin scar along his cheek, the faint trace of an old fear. When they reached the porch, Vala rose but didn't bark. Ethan stood, his expression wary but calm. Carter removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "I came to apologize," he said quietly. "I let my fear speak louder than the truth. You were right about him." Ethan looked down at Vala, then back at Carter. "We both had ghosts to fight," he said softly. Carter nodded, motioning to his son. "Luke's been scared of dogs since that day. But he wanted to see him." Ethan knelt, gesturing for Vala to lie down. The dog obeyed instantly, lowering his head to the porch floor, his body language soft and still. Luke hesitated, eyes wide, breath quick. "It's okay," Ethan said gently. "He's safe. He's one of us." Slowly, the boy reached out and placed his hand on Vala's head. The dog didn't move. He just sighed, a low, contented sound that broke the tension like dawn breaks the night. Luke smiled for the first time in years. Carter's eyes filled with tears. In that moment, 3 souls found healing. The man who'd carried guilt, the man who'd carried fear, and the child who'd carried both. When they left, the ranch was quiet again. Ethan sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land. Vala lay beside him, head resting on Ethan's boot, eyes half closed. The silence was no longer empty. It was peace. Sometimes the bonds we find are the ones that were written long before we ever met. Ethan thought he was saving a dog, but in truth, it was Vala who saved him. From guilt, from silence, from himself. 2 soldiers, 1 human, 1 canine, both carrying scars the world could not see, reminding us that redemption doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from finding someone who understands our pain and stands beside us anyway. Their story is a promise to anyone lost in the dark, that even after the worst storm, there's always a dawn waiting. And sometimes, that dawn has 4 paws and eyes that remember everything.